Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to create a shareable ESLint and Prettier config. We will also take a look at how to then publish it to NPM, and then lastly we'll see how you would actually use it in your projects. So the idea behind this is if you have a particular code formatting style that you follow, and maybe some specific linting rules as well, this will allow you to have it in a single package that you can then use across many different projects without having to set it up from scratch every time. Alright, now before we get started, a quick disclaimer. This video assumes that you have either used or heard of both ESLint and Prettier before, as I won't be going into too much detail about what they are, but rather how to set up our config for both of them. And if I had to quickly summarize, ESLint is a JavaScript code linter. So it analyzes your code and looks for any potential problems, whether that's with the logic or code conventions and stuff like that. And then Prettier is an opinionated code formatter. So Prettier worries about things like extra line spacing, the number of tabs, and so on. So you'll often find the two used together side by side, and they make a nice combination to really streamline your development workflow. So that will be the goal of today's video. Is we'll take a look at how we can create a reusable configuration for both ESLint and Prettier, and so that you don't have to set it up from scratch every time, but rather you can just install it in your project and quickly get up and running with it. All right, so to get started, we're going to be creating a node project, and I've already got the first few files created here. As you'll see, I got the package.json with the name of our package. So we're using the npm scoped module naming convention, and this is one of the conventions you can follow. So your first part could be your company name or anything like that. And the other way that you could do is using just the ESLint-config convention. Okay, then our main file is going to be index.js. So this will be our entry point into our package. And then we have a number of peer dependencies that we'll need to use. So these are all things that are needed for our config to work properly and for ESLint and Prettier to actually run. The idea is that we're expecting the users of this config to install these in their project, and we're just providing them with the list of what is required. Now you'll see there's a number of existing ESLint plugins specified here, as well as a couple of configs. And the reason for that is we're actually going to be extending an existing config as the base of ours, and we're just going to be overriding a couple of rules to match our own coding style and formatting that we're familiar with. And the config that we're using as the base is the Airbnb ESLint config. This follows the Airbnb JavaScript style guide, which is a pretty popular set of conventions that result in very clean and readable code. And so in order to use this config, there's a number of plugins that we need to install. So we're going to be specifying these as peer dependencies in our setup here. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to create our index file. So in the root of our project, we'll say index.js, and this will be the main entry point into our config. So the first thing we need to do is we need to extend the Airbnb config as we saw previously. So in order to do that, we'll say module exports, and we'll say extends. And this is where you specify the array of any configs that you want to extend. So in our case, we want Airbnb. And then we also want the Airbnb hooks config as well. So this will ensure that we're following the rules of hooks for React. And it's definitely a valuable thing to have. Now, the last one that we need is the Prettier overrides. So there's a couple of rules that will conflict with ESLint's default settings and the ones in Prettier. So we're going to use the Prettier plugin to disable those conflicting rules and ensure that we're not running into any issues. And the Prettier plugin comes with a set of recommended rules, so we will utilize those as well. Okay, next we need to specify our environments. So this will ensure that ESLint is able to identify some of the common global variables that exist in the various different environments. So we want to ensure that our config is usable across a number of different environments. Otherwise, it will identify false positives for global variables. So we're going to specify browser, node, common.js, and we will go with the latest ECMAScript version, just so we can use the latest JavaScript without ESLint complaining. And finally, we'll add jest as well for our testing. So let's go ahead and add all of these to our config. And to do that, we need to specify the environments over here as env. So first we need browser. Then we need common.js. And we're setting all of these to true. Then we'll have ES 2021. We're going to set jest to true as well. And lastly, node. Okay, next we need to specify some additional parser options. And this is to enable some of the JavaScript language options that we want to support. So by default, ESLint expects your code to be in ES5. We obviously want to update that to be the latest, as well as we want our modules, or rather our source type, to be set to modules, as we're going to be using this with ES module code. And then since we're using this in a React project, we also want JSX to be enabled as well. Okay, so in our index file here, we need to add parser options. And in here, we can say ECMA version. So this will be 2021. Next, source type. We want this to be module. And the last one is ECMA features. And we want to enable JSX. Let's say JSX set to true. All right, next we want to add some shared settings for one of the plugins that we're using. So in ESLint config, you can have a common settings section here. And for our React ESLint plugin, we want to specify a setting that will automatically detect the version of React that we're using. And so the way you do that is you can see here in settings, you specify React and set the version to detect. Now it says here that it will be default in a future version of this plugin, but for now we need to specify that manually. So let's go ahead and do that. So back in our index file, we'll say settings, React, and we'll say version and set that to detect. All right, now we could end it here and just use the existing configuration that we've got so far. But one of the reasons why we actually started this is we want to override some of the rules that are provided by these configurations. And the way we do that is by adding another section here called rules. All right, so I've got a list of rules here that I would like to override. And as you see, I've broken them out into different categories. This will just make it a little bit easier to manage down the road. So I've got my base set of rules that apply to any JavaScript. And then I've got one specific to React. And then Next.js in particular. So this one's an interesting one because if we use the Next.js link component with the current API, ESLint will actually complain when we use this accessibility plugin. And the reason for that is if we look at the Next link API here, we're not specifying the href. So that plugin will throw an error in this case. So this is why we need to turn off this rule for anything that is any of these components. All right, and then the last, we've got Prettier. So these are rules specific to Prettier. You'll see I got my print width and the single quote rule enabled. And because we're using the Prettier plugin, we need to specify the Prettier options as an ESLint rule. So when we add it to our list, we'll need to specify that this is for Prettier specifically. So to keep things consistent and neatly organized, I'm going to create a separate file for each of these rule categories. And then I'll just import them in our main config here and just specify them under the rules. So let's go ahead and create those. So I'm going to put them in a folder called lib, and you can use whichever name you'd like. You could call it source or anything like that. And then I'll create a file called base.js. So in here, we'll put our base rules. So let me just copy that. And then in here, we can just say module exports. And we'll specify these rules. Okay, now let's go ahead and do the same for the rest of them. Now that we've got these rule sets created, let's go ahead and import them in our main config here. Okay, and then the last thing we need to do is let's use them in our rules. All right, and then our config is done. So you'll see we're extending the Airbnb configuration, we're specifying our environments and parser options, and then we're overriding the specific rules that we're interested in, and then we're also setting the React version to be auto-detected. All right, now that we've got our configuration set up, let's take a look at how we would go about publishing it to NPM. That way we can install it just like any other NPM dependency, and you can use it across all of your different projects. So the first thing you'll need to do is you'll need to create an account on NPM. As you can see, I'm already logged in, but if you don't have an account, you'll need to create that first before you can publish. And once that's done, there's a couple of things that we need to update in our package.json. So the first thing is I had to actually change the name to the other convention. I was having issues with having the scoped package name, so I decided to go with this convention instead, just so I could publish it. Next, we'll need to specify the files that we want included in our package. So we need to add the files attribute, and then this will take in an array. And in here, we want to specify our license. We want our README file. We want index.js. And then we want the entire lib folder. Next, make sure that you have some keywords specified. So this will just make it easier for people to find your package on NPM. Then ensure that you have your name and license specified. So for the license, you'll see that I already have one here. But if you don't have a license and you want to generate the standard text, you can either generate it on GitHub, or you can use this site, chooselicense.com. This will provide placeholder text for you that you can copy, and that's actually what I did for mine. All right, so now we got license specified. The last thing you need to do is you need to ensure that you have the repository. So this should be linking to your GitHub account and the repo. And then also you'll need to specify bugs URL. So this will link to your issue board in your repo, and then the homepage should just point to your README. So these are needed so that in NPM, when people are viewing your package, the description and details are all visible. All right, so I actually have this already published, and I'll share a link to this in the description so that you can check it out and start using it yourself if you'd like. All right, but this is where all that comes in. So you'll see the homepage is linked here, and the repo, and if you want to submit an issue, that's available as well. Okay, so once all that info is filled in, let's save our package.json, and then to publish it, first you will need to log in to NPM. So NPM login. So go ahead and fill out your details there. And once you're logged in, you can simply type in npm publish. Now I won't actually press enter because it's already published, but that will be the process. If you run into any issues, make sure that the package name is not already taken. right? So do a search for the name that you're thinking to ensure that doesn't already exist. And another issue you may have is if you already published a version and you try to publish the same version again, you'll run into an error. So anytime you need to publish a new version, make sure you increment this. Once your config is published and is available publicly on npm, let's go ahead and try it out in a real project. So for this, we're going to create just a basic Next.js starter template app, and we will add our config to it and see how we can run it. So let's go ahead and say npx create next app. Once that's done, let's open it up in VS Code. And as you can see here right now, it's just the bare bones starter Next.js template. So let's go ahead and add our config to this. So to do that, we will install it as a dev dependency. So we'll say npm install -d and then ESLint config acme. So this will install our config as well as all of the peer dependencies, as long as you're on npm version 7 and above. If you're in older versions of npm, you will need to install the peer dependencies manually. So as we'll see, dev dependencies, we just have the config specified. Okay. Next, let's add an ESLint RC file. So our ESLint configuration file, and this is where we'll specify that we want to extend our config. So extends, and we can simply say acme and save that. Okay. Next, let's add a script to actually run the ESLint. So we'll add a new script and say lint. And here we can say ESLint, and we can add an option to ignore particular files. So you can say ESLint -- ignore -path, and then we will just use whatever's in our git ignore file. So git ignore, and then simply space dot, and this will run lint on all of the files that match the expected extensions. So if we save that and now run npm run lint, this will run ESLint and identify any errors that we may have. So let's go ahead and try it out. All right, so it looks like we've got a bunch of errors here. Let's see what the problem is. All right, so as you can see, ESLint identified a couple of errors. So we were missing semicolons. There's just a couple of spacing issues. All right, nothing big, but it doesn't align with our rule set. So let's go ahead and fix that. Now you can either fix it manually, or you can add another script that will attempt to fix any issues that ESLint automatically is able to fix. It will fix it for you. So we'll just name this script lint:fix, and then all we need to do is to add an additional flag at the end here. --fix. Okay, so if we now run npm run lint:fix, okay, it should have fixed them. Let's check this out. So yeah, you'll see files changed, and you'll notice that semicolons got added. So if we run lint again, we should have no issues. And there we go. Our output is clean, so there are no issues. Now, let's say you want to override some of the default rules. For example, if you want to change a rule from a warning to an error, like for the console log statement here, that's super easy to do. In our ESLint RC file, we can simply override the rules as you would with a regular ESLint config. So I can say no console and set that to error, for example. And now if we run our lint script, we'll see that this results in an error. So any valid ESLint options can be specified here, and they will override the defaults that are provided by our shared config. So that will be it for today's video. If you're interested in this particular config, I actually already have it published, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below. So feel free to use it if you'd like. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.